I was hitchhiking my way from Velden, Germany to Belvoir, hoping to reach an art exhibit where I needed to collect a few paintings. That's when I met him. A Frenchman with a scruffy beard, wearing worn-out clothes. He was short, looked unkempt, and seemed close to my own age, which was 29 at the time. He didn't speak much English, and I didn't know a single word of French. I had no idea who this man really was. It was October, and the day was pleasant. The sun was out, the sky was blue, and the temperature was ideal. Perfect weather to be traveling on the road. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, I met him at a petrol station somewhere in rural France. He offered me a lift in his old beat-up vehicle, and I gladly accepted, relieved to be on my way to Belvoir. As we cruised along the main highway, we exchanged some small talk. Mostly, he asked where I was from. Then suddenly, without warning, he leaned over my lap to open the glove compartment. Inside, he had what looked like a stack of documents, passports. He handed them to me. There were 4 of them. The first belonged to a young woman, whom he said had been his girlfriend. She had apparently died after falling off the back of his motorcycle. The second, also a girlfriend, had passed away in a car accident, he told me. The third, he said, succumbed to a brain tumor. And the fourth, she had died after falling off a horse. I have such terrible luck, he muttered. I nodded, acknowledging his misfortune. That's when the unease began. I was sitting in a car with a man who somehow possessed the passports of 4 deceased women. Soon after, he said we would be taking a shortcut to reach Belvoir. It didn't sound like a suggestion, more like a decision already made. At first, I felt relieved. Maybe this would get me to my destination faster. I imagined we'd cut through scenic villages and quiet roads lined with cottages and farmland. But instead, he veered off onto a narrow dirt path that branched off the highway. I had a bad feeling immediately. Still, I didn't say anything. Why do we stay silent at moments like these? Maybe it's politeness or fear disguised as manners. The dirt road wound its way through open fields at first, across the bright green French hills. Eventually, we reached dense forest land. As the path tightened, the trees grew closer, and the light faded. The deeper we went, the more it felt like the woods were swallowing us. Despite the anxiety creeping up my spine, I couldn't help but notice the haunting beauty of the place, both breathtaking and eerie. That's when the man abruptly said in broken English, "I not speak English anymore." It wasn't a request. Then he fell silent. That silence echoed. We were deep in the forest, and I could feel adrenaline begin to stir in my veins. My instincts were beginning to prepare for something. Fight or flight mode was kicking in. Communication between us had officially ended. I knew I would have questions soon, but I also knew I wouldn't dare ask them. By now, it was 5 p.m. The sun was slipping behind the trees, and the forest around us was growing darker. The man looked tense, lost in his own world, and I noticed his lips twitching slightly, like he was muttering to himself. His movements felt controlled, but strange, snake-like almost. I moved my hand quietly toward the door handle. I'm sure he noticed. The car began to slow down. I didn't say anything. Was this the moment? Did he have a weapon? Would he try something? It felt like time had paused. I was now caught in a surreal scenario, not what I had planned for that day. Maybe I had somehow transmitted my awareness to him. Maybe he sensed I wasn't going to go quietly. I wasn't helpless. I had my own strength, my own history of navigating tough situations. There was something raw and primitive happening between us, a kind of silent calculation. In just a few seconds, we both seemed to assess the other. Could one overpower the other? Could either one kill? All the details, pain, death, blood, swirled somewhere in that unspoken analysis. These kinds of mental battles probably go differently when one person is smaller, afraid, and pleading. Then it just becomes a hunt, a scene of dominance, terror, and despair. By 5:12, The car had slowed to a crawl, and something inside me shifted. I felt myself enter a state I'd never been in before, mentally prepared to do whatever was necessary. Perhaps he saw it in my face, or sensed it in the air. My hand was still on the door handle, and then suddenly he sped up. We were moving again, faster this time, back toward civilization. Thank God. These memories have only resurfaced while writing this. Some details I'm not fully certain about. Did he say one of his girlfriends attacked him, and he had to hit her with a shovel to make her stop? Were there 2 backpacks in the back seat, and did he explain them? Did I just block that out? Were there more than 4 passports in that glove box? Why didn't I tell him to stop the car? Eventually, the road widened again. We left the forest and drove into a sunset smeared in deep red and orange. I could hear the sound of traffic again, and soon we reached the main highway. Small houses dotted the horizon across the road. I still didn't know where I was. Then he asked if I'd like to spend the night at his place. He said we could share a meal. Instantly, a mental image of a grimy basement full of tools and chains flashed in my head. I declined, politely but firmly. That was the first thing I had said since he told me to stop speaking English. To this day, I believe that if I had broken that silence in the woods, if I had started talking nervously, things might have ended very differently. Remaining silent may have saved my life. Maybe one of the women from those passports couldn't stay quiet when fear overtook her, and maybe that was what gave him permission to unleash something monstrous. I got out of the car by the side of the road. It was almost fully dark. I watched as he drove off into the night. I never reported anything to the authorities. I didn't speak French, and I kept telling myself maybe I had just overthought everything. I yelled something into the sky, a mix of confusion and disbelief. What had just happened? I ended up sleeping near the highway, too drained to do anything else. The next morning, I looked down at my hands, half expecting them to vanish. I was still alive. 2 decades later, I was in a cafe in Lauenburg, Germany, tutoring a business student in English. Somehow, the topic of hitchhiking came up, and I told him the whole story. Right then, he pulled out his phone and searched for French serial killers. He turned the screen toward me and showed me photos. There he was. It was him, the man I'd shared that silent ride with all those years ago. His name was Lucien Armand, a serial killer who was active in 1990. At the time of my journey, authorities had been finding bodies of young women abandoned near highways across France. My girlfriend back then had warned me about hitchhiking, saying a killer was on the loose. I've often thought about those women. I've wondered if some of them, and maybe others, were buried in the very woods we passed through. I wish now that I'd gone to the police. I've tried since, but the authorities told me the case is closed. He's serving time, and they're not interested. That guilt stays with me. The thought that maybe I could have helped stop more deaths. Maybe some part of the victims came with me that day, escaping that forest through my survival. Maybe that's why I still feel the darkness flickering inside me. It was a rainy evening, and I was on my way home after finishing a late shift at the small 24-hour cafe where I work. The night had been slow, not many customers, yet for some reason I still felt oddly alert. I already knew I'd need to take a melatonin tablet when I got home if I wanted to get any sleep. I followed my regular route, a road that's pleasant during the day with scenic views, but turns pitch black at night due to the lack of streetlights. Here and there, you'll find a small plaza with mom-and-pop shops or diners, but mostly it's just endless stretches of woods. As I passed one of those familiar parking lots, a spot known for its popular sandwich shop, I noticed a woman standing beneath a lamppost. She was out in the open, drenched from the rain, and holding her arm up, trying to flag me down. I slowed the car and saw that she was a woman likely in her mid-50s. She was surprisingly tall, at least 5 feet 11 inches, maybe even taller but very slim. I rolled down my window and asked, "Do you need a ride?" She hurried over, opened the passenger door, and started thanking me profusely, calling me a lifesaver. I asked where she was headed, and she replied that she just needed to get a bit further up the road into town. Despite her soaked clothes leaving puddles on the seat, I didn't feel right turning her away in this weather. I try to do the right thing when I can, although I'll admit I'd probably think twice about giving a random man a lift under similar circumstances. She seemed friendly enough, though I couldn't help but notice a few missing teeth, which was a bit unsettling. It crossed my mind that she might be homeless, although she didn't give off that usual appearance or smell. Still, the rain might have masked that. Her hair, soaking wet, hung flat against her head. It might normally be messy, but the rain had likely weighed it down. Even so, she kept smiling and chatting, and didn't seem dangerous. We came up to an intersection with a fuel station on the corner, so I pulled in to fill up. I figured I might as well ask if she wanted anything from inside, trying to go the extra mile in being kind. She declined politely with a, "No thank you, sweetheart." So I went in alone, paid the clerk, and grabbed a few spiked seltzers for the weekend. When I returned to the car, the passenger seat was empty. She had vanished. I glanced around the small parking area, but it was quiet and there was no sign of her. It was like she had just disappeared. I felt a bit uneasy, almost guilty, wondering if she'd gotten lost or wandered off in confusion. But I also felt a weird sense of relief. I filled up my tank and continued the rest of the drive home. Once I got back, I went straight into my apartment, which takes up the ground floor of a 2-unit house. Another tenant lives upstairs. The building's front door that leads to the foyer is usually left unlocked, but each apartment has its own lockable door. I stepped inside, got out of the rain, and placed the seltzers on the kitchen counter. I still wasn't sleepy, so I took the melatonin and tried to settle in for the night. Even with the melatonin, though, my brain just wouldn't settle. I kept replaying that weird encounter over and over in my head. Every now and then, I thought I heard faint noises from the hallway, but I figured they were just sounds from the neighbor upstairs. I really wish I had been more alert before finally dozing off. Later in the night, I woke up in complete darkness. Something that normally doesn't happen when I take sleep aids. They usually knock me out cold. I felt groggy and parched, so I reached toward my nightstand for my water. That's when I noticed movement. Something, or someone, was crouched in the corner of my room, partially hidden behind my dresser. My first instinct was that I was imagining it. I shook my head, rubbed my eyes, even gave myself a slap to snap out of it. But then the figure slowly rose to a standing position and silently walked out of the room. I didn't scream, I didn't speak, I just sat there in absolute terror. The most disturbing part? I didn't hear a single sound, no footsteps, no doors creaking, nothing. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He answered, puzzled as to why I was calling so late. I told him exactly what had just happened, and he calmly suggested, "Kim, it was probably just a night terror." I stayed on the line with him while I got up, turned on the living room lights, and checked around. The apartment was small, and it was clear no one else was there. I almost managed to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. Still, I locked my bedroom door before trying to sleep again. The next morning, I made myself some coffee and got ready for the gym. But when I went to open the door to the foyer, I found it already unlocked. That made my stomach drop. Could last night's experience have actually been real? I searched the apartment again, but there was no one there. I walked out to my car, opened the back door to throw in my gym bag, and that's when I saw it. The floor in the back seat was covered in damp, yellowish-brown stains, and the blanket I always kept back there, it was gone. I felt like I was about to cry or scream. Suddenly, everything made sense while I was inside the gas station. That woman must have snuck into the back seat. Either she found a way to unlock my apartment door later, or I had carelessly left it open. Panicked, I called my dad again and asked him what I should do. He told me to check whether anything had been stolen, and that if nothing was missing, the police probably wouldn't be able to help much. I looked through the place again, but nothing seemed out of place aside from that missing blanket from the car. I skipped the gym entirely. In fact, I stayed holed up in my apartment for days after that. I felt deeply unsettled. I couldn't shake the feeling that my space had been violated. After that month, I made up my mind I had to move, and I did. A few months back, something happened that I still can't fully make sense of. For some reason, I agreed to tag along with my friend Jordan to a house party he was invited to, even though I wasn't actually invited myself. It was during our first year of high school, and Jordan managed to talk the hosts into letting me come. Since I couldn't drive yet, I had no option but to ride with him. We arrived at the house late at night. As we parked, Jordan turned to me and suggested I leave my phone in the car. He said it was safer that way, less chance of misplacing it, or having someone I didn't know snatch it while I wasn't paying attention. I thought it was a weird request, but I nodded and went along with it. The party was mostly happening in the backyard. I followed Jordan as we made our way in. Scanning the yard, I saw groups of teenagers gathered around, drinking, smoking, and some likely doing other things I didn't want to think about. Jordan nudged me and said I should go around and introduce myself to a few people. After a couple of hours, I realized I had way too much to drink. My vision was blurred, and I could barely keep my balance. I staggered toward the house and leaned against the exterior wall to steady myself. I glanced at my watch. It was somewhere around midnight, maybe even closer to 1 a.m. That's when I decided it was time to head home. I started looking for Jordan, even though all I wanted to do was collapse. I searched the backyard for him, but couldn't spot him anywhere. I asked a few people if they'd seen him around, but everyone said they hadn't. That's when I remembered my phone was still in his car. I reached into my pocket out of habit, only to be reminded of that dumb decision. I was stuck. The only option left was walking home, and luckily I remembered my house wasn't too far from here. Still, the cold autumn night wasn't exactly ideal. I thought about asking someone else for a ride, but I didn't really know anyone well enough. So, I stuck with the idea of walking back by myself through the dark. I made my way onto the street, my steps wobbly and unsteady. It was obvious I'd had too much to drink, my head was spinning, and I felt dizzy. After a few minutes of slow, shaky progress, I reached the main road and kept walking, zoning out and letting my mind wander. I couldn't stop thinking about why Jordan had ditched me, or why I'd listened to his ridiculous advice about the phone. I was angry with myself for drinking so carelessly and getting into this situation in the first place. Eventually, I stopped walking, too tired to continue. I wrapped my arms tightly around myself to try and stay warm. That's when I remembered the concept of hitchhiking. With a glimmer of hope, I stuck my thumb out and waited. Several cars drove by without stopping. Minutes dragged on, and my hope began to fade. It was now well past 1 a.m., and while a few cars passed, none of them paid any attention to me. I considered walking again, but quickly realized I wasn't in any shape to do that. Just when I was about to give up, a gray pickup truck pulled over and came to a stop. I felt a wave of relief and stumbled toward it. The window rolled down to reveal an older man with a scruffy beard. He asked if I needed a lift. I nodded and gave him my address before climbing inside, thankful that someone had finally stopped. As we drove, the man tried making small talk. He asked me what had happened, how I'd ended up out there. But I wasn't really able to hold a conversation, I was too disoriented. The best I could manage were a few mumbled replies and faint groans. Then we turned down the street where my house was located. But instead of stopping, the truck kept going. I told him he had just passed my place, and immediately a sinking feeling hit my stomach. Something wasn't right. I wanted to get out, but I was too out of it to move properly. I was just about to ask him to let me out when he suddenly glanced over at me. The look on his face had changed. It was cold, unsettling. "You really shouldn't hitchhike when you're drunk," he said with a creepy smirk, makes you an easy mark." Then he reached over and started touching my leg. I didn't know what his intentions were, but I could tell they weren't good. Right before anything worse could happen, a loud siren wailed from behind us, and red and blue lights lit up the inside of the truck. It was the police. Inside, I felt a surge of relief. The man immediately froze and slammed on the brakes. He hit the unlock button, and I wasted no time. I leapt out of the truck and ran. A police officer came straight to me, and I frantically explained everything that had just taken place. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything clearly illegal that had happened yet. The officer told me he had pulled the truck over because someone matching the vehicle's description had allegedly stolen from a nearby shop. He didn't confirm if it was the same man, but either way, I was just grateful he'd shown up when he did. The officer gave me a ride home. After that night, I made a firm promise to myself. I'd never let myself get that intoxicated again. I understood now just how important it is to stay aware and responsible even when you're just out trying to have fun.